Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhare Gopi Jana Ballava Giribaradhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Jai Prabhupada 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajakacharyas Tadis Srimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Ki, Shri Giri Govardhan Ki, Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki, Sankirtan Yagya Ki, Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 23, Maharaj Prithu's Going Back Home, Text 15. Utsarpayams. That's it, right? To tam murdne kramenaveshya nispriha vayom vayav kshito kayam tejas tejasi ayuyo jat utsarpayam stutam murdne kramena veshya nispriha vayum vayokshito kayam tejas tejas yayuyujat utsarpayam stutam murdne kramena veshya nispriha vayum vayokshito kayam tejas tejas yayuyujat utsarpayam stutam murdne kramena veshya nispriha vayum vayokshito kayam tejas tejas yayuyujat Utsarpayan, thus placing to but tam the air, murdne on the head, kramena gradually, aveshya placing, nispriha being freed from all material desires, vayom the air portion of the body, vaya in the total air covering the universe, kshito in the total covering of earth, kayam this material body, teja the fire in the body, tejase in the total fire of the material covering, ayuyujat mixed. Translation: in this way, Prithu Maharaj gradually raised his air of life up to the hole in his skull, whereupon he lost all desire for material existence. Gradually he merged his air of life with the totality of air, his body with the totality of earth, and the fire within his body with the totality of fire. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When the spiritual spark, which is described as 1/10,000th part of the tip of a hair, is forced into material existence, that spark is covered by gross and subtle material elements. The material body is composed of 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and 3 subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and ego. When one attains liberation, he is freed from these material coverings. Indeed, success in yoga involves getting free from these material coverings and entering into spiritual existence. Lord Buddha's teachings of nirvana are based on this principle. Lord Buddha instructed his followers to give up these material coverings by means of meditation and yoga. Lord Buddha did not give any information about the soul, but if one follows his instructions strictly, he will ultimately become free from the material coverings and attain nirvana. When a living entity gives up the material coverings, he remains a spirit soul. The spirit soul must enter into the spiritual sky to merge into the Brahman effulgence. Unfortunately, unless the living entity has information of the spiritual world and the Vaikunthas, there is a 99.9% chance of his falling down again into material existence. There is, however, a small chance of being promoted to a spiritual planet from the Brahman effulgence or the Brahmajyoti. This Brahmajyoti is considered by impersonalists to be without variety, and the Buddhists consider it to be void. In either case, whether one accepts the spiritual sky as being without variety or void, there is none of the spiritual bliss which is enjoyed in the spiritual planets, the Vaikunthas or Krishna Loka. In the absence of varieties of enjoyment, the spirit soul gradually feels an attraction to enjoy a life of bliss. And not having any information of Krishna Loka or Vaikuntha Loka, he naturally falls down to material activities in order to enjoy material varieties. Utsarpayam stutam murdne kramena veshya nispriha vayom vayok shito kayam Tejas tejas yayu yujat. In this way, Prithu Maharaj gradually raised his air of life up to the hole in his skull, whereupon he lost all desire for material existence. Gradually, he merged his air of life with the totality of air, his body with the totality of earth, and the fire within his body with the totality of fire. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschitya Deshatarane Vanchikalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nanda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So yes, this is further description of Prithu Maharaj gradually giving up the material body, giving up the material world, and going off to the spiritual world, to Goloka Vrindavan, to live there in life of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So the thing is, as has been described, like you noticed yesterday, no doubt, and it's been in different ways described over the last some number of verses, but particularly yesterday's verse, what he did, rather extraordinary process, as he was just in the process of giving up the body. It's not that, we should definitely be very clear, it's not really that these types of things like what's described here today, raising our air of life up to the hole in our skull. We're generally not capable of doing something like that. I don't know if any of you have practiced that. Any of you practice that? I doubt it. Yes, but interestingly, when he did that, he lost all desire for material existence. Not that he really had much, if any, but whatever traces may have been there, they left him. And then he merged his air of life with the totality of air, that's around us. And then his body with the totality of earth, because the body is, in a certain sense, predominantly made of earth. In a certain sense, in the sense that what is visible and touchable, etc., this is all made of earth. Not earth like not exactly earth like what's in the garden, but the element earth, yes, which includes what's in the garden too, but not only that. Yes, so the earth portion of our gross material body of arms and legs and organs and bones, etc., that which is visible and sort of tangible, or more tangible at least, is made of earth. But actually we learn, at least we learn, I learned at school, I assume you did, that our material bodies are something along the lines of 70% water, or maybe it's slightly more. I don't know, in South Africa, what percentage did you learn at school? Most of you were there more recently than me, so do you remember? But it's 70 or something along those lines. That's what you were told? Yeah. Of course, some people are described as being wishy-washy. They may have a larger percentage of water, who knows? But otherwise, it's generally something like that. So it's predominantly water. But that water is not visible and tangible, tangibly experienceable as much as the earth is, despite it apparently, or despite it being the majority of what the body's made of. But when we talk about blood, then this is composed primarily of the element earth, of the element water, although there is some of the element earth in it. It's not like just plain H2O, which we are all very familiar with, because blood is red. And where does the redness come from? It's some earth, or some part of earth is mixed with blood, with the water, yes, which makes up blood. And it's very interesting how these things work. Yes. So anyway, then, but particularly what he did, he merged his material body, the actual physical body as we have our bodies right now, with the totality of earth, and surely the water part of these bodies got mixed with the totality of water. But then the fire within his body, he merged with the totality of fire. Shishi Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Caitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Yes, the fire within the body. And when we talk of the fire within the body, we're talking about in a very sort of subtle sense, elemental sense. It's certainly not that there is an actual fire as such situated within our bodies, like when you burn some wood or something like that, you get flames. It's not in those terms at least, but at least on an elemental level, it's fire in that it has heat. Just intrinsically it has heat, and therefore we're sitting here right now, and of course it's not that cold in here, but it is a bit colder than our bodies. You just feel, like on your head where your body is exposed right now, then you can feel it's a bit colder than our bodies are. And even sometimes when you go to a very cold place, like some days it's very cold, not so much here, but you get cold weather. But like up in Johannesburg, you sometimes, or at this time, you get really quite cold weather. Sometimes it even snows. And in other parts of the world, like the Arctic regions and places like that, even in Russia or similar places, Canada, you get very cold weather, minus in centigrade, minus 30, 40, 50, even sometimes a bit more than 50. But, well, the coldest I was in was at minus 46, and it's very cold. I can tell you. You don't want to go and experience it because it's dangerously cold. If you inhale it too strongly, it goes in and it can freeze your lungs, and that can be problematic. Yes. a bright, sunny day like this, but minus 46. Anyway, but still, our bodies, if you take your temperature, even in a place like that, where it's really very cold by our standards, then you'll find our body, if you take your temperature with a thermometer or something, one of these devices, what will you find? That it's something like, 38.6 or something, isn't it? I believe that's normal, 38.6. Yeah, you'll find your body's that temperature. And maybe it'll go down a bit when you're in extremely cold weather, but not that much. Certainly it's not going to go to minus anything. It won't go anywhere near minus anything. Why? Because the element fire is within the body. And that is the fire of digestion. When we eat our prasadam, then it gets broken down from whatever it was, gets broken down by a process which involves or is based on the element fire, which is particularly sort of in the form of chemicals. This is what we understand, how our bodies function, how our bodies digest food. They're chemicals which then act on the food as it passes through the system. Yeah, so it's the element fire, but in a particular form. So this material world, of course, is made up of all these different elements. Prabhupada lists them out here: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And then mind, intelligence, and ego. This is what the material world is made of. Yes, so but when you become liberated, then you become freed from the coverings. So normally, of course, what happens is, and it's probably, I'm sure it's what's going to happen with us in due course, we're all going to go the same way that Prithu Maharaj is going. But it's unlikely that that we are going to methodically raise our life air, for example, up to the top of the head and merge that air with the totality of air, this air which is around us. And it's unlikely that we are going to deliberately break down our physical bodies and let the component, the earth parts at least, merge with the earth which is here around, and the fire somehow or other extract the fire from within the physical system and merge it into the totality of fire. I don't think any of us would be capable of, and it's just not going to happen like that. But what is going to happen, devotees, is our bodies are just going to drop. That's it. Just as a unit, the body will drop. And then it's just by the actions of material nature, these different parts mentioned here, which Prithu Maharaj consciously, deliberately separated from each other and merged and so on, all that, that's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. Our bodies will break down and so on and so forth. And there you go. And there you go. Let's hope there we go. Let us pray to the Lord. I mean, pray to the Lord, of course, but let us work on our Krishna consciousness, and then it can certainly happen. Srila Prabhupada made it clear on numerous accounts, on numerous occasions. He talked about how if you chant Hare Krishna, follow the regulative principles, do devotional service, and just in general live the life of Krishna consciousness, but if you do it very nicely, consistently through your life, right up to that time where the body just drops and the spirit soul then is freed from the body, then on how many occasions, I mean, we could do a search actually and see how many occasions, but it's lots, that he said that at that time one may go back to Godhead. Or one, we would certainly hope to go back to Godhead, and we would definitely hope to not have to take birth again, particularly in some sort of materially conditioned state, with materially conditioned, in some sort of materially conditioned family and all of that. Because even though one practices Krishna consciousness through one's life when one is a conscious, like an adult, but if we're not careful when the time of death comes, and if we have not been careful during the course of our lives, careful enough, then we may take birth again, and we see that this happens. That some people, they take birth again, even in a devotee family, like Srila Prabhupada. He had 4 or 5 children, I forget the number actually. In fact, it's not absolutely clear, but 4 or 5. And none of them, so they're born in the family of the greatest devotee of the modern age, of our times at least, for sure, by far, but none of them became like really serious devotees. They were, at least one of them was a devotee, nice. He used to visit our temple occasionally in Mayapur. He would come and say a few words, and it was interesting. He looked like Prabhupada. He really did. He looked quite like Prabhupada, at least, bigger. But otherwise his face, it looked like quite like Prabhupada's face. And he had beads, and he was nice. He had some attachment to Krishna consciousness, but he was not an active practitioner of Krishna consciousness. He just wasn't. He was more just like a nice Hindu gentleman who's got some attachment to Krishna consciousness. And some, particularly one of Prabhupada's sons, became more or less a demon, actually. Well, really not a good person at all. So you got to watch out. Don't just think, we must not think that, well, I'm a devotee, so, even if I'm not so serious about it, but I'm a devotee, so I'll at least be born in a devotee family and it'll be all right, I'll just carry on. It may not be that simple. Particularly when you're a child, then, of course, if one is already been deeply absorbed in Krishna consciousness, one can be a very Krishna conscious child. But otherwise, children are not really, they don't have intelligence, really, until at least a certain point. Some intelligence develops, and like really clear intelligence only after a number of years. So even it's described in Caitanya Charitamrita how Advaita Acharya had 6 sons. 3 of them became great devotees, headed by Achyutananda, just great, great devotees, to say the least. But the other 3 became impersonalists, headed by one whose name was Balaram. But they were not really devotees. In fact, what happened with them was that Advaita Acharya was older than Lord Caitanya, like a generation older, so maybe 30 years, 20, 30 years, something like that older than Lord Caitanya. And when Lord Caitanya was young, Advaita Acharya was the leader of the Vaishnavas in the Navadvip area. So he was very prominent and just, of course, great, great devotee. So those sons, what happened to the 3 of them, was that they did not like it that Lord Caitanya became more prominent in due course, and eventually much more prominent than Advaita Acharya. He sort of became really quite overshadowed by Lord Caitanya and Lord Nityananda. But they were feeling, well, our father is senior and he's that sort of thing. And they actually developed a type of envy towards Lord Caitanya particularly, and also Lord Nityananda. And because of that offense, they lost their, like the real sanctity of their Krishna consciousness. Yes, so anyway, the point is that now we have the opportunity of Krishna consciousness, and now we're all adults, we're thinking people, and we can evaluate things and understand things and make and organize ourselves and our lives. So we should do like that and organize our lives so that we really are focused on Krishna consciousness as much as you could say humanly possible. And that will maximize the possibility that we can actually go back to Godhead, back to Goloka Vrindavan at the end of this lifetime. Otherwise, if you come back, then, probably, unless you really make some big offenses or do something really wrong, you'll probably be born in a family of devotees. But then, who knows? It's sort of like anything could happen, practically. So therefore, we shouldn't waste this opportunity that we have now in this human form of life. Anyway, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is looking, he focuses mainly on the impersonalists, including the Buddhists, and what happens or may happen with them. So, Prabhupada mentions how Buddha was talking of a state called nirvana, in which one is free from the body and is just situated sort of in some essential state, but actually not even really an essential state. It's just nothingness, not a state of nothingness. And that means it's not really a state. It's just nothingness. At least the regular impersonalists, they say, yes, we are spirit souls, and we must live as spirit souls. But the Buddhist idea is we should try and live as nothing, shunyavad, Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane. In Sanskrit and any North Indian language, the word shunya means nothing. It's the word for zero. Naught, zero, is shunya. And shunyavad means knowledge, vad meaning knowledge of nothing. And what is knowledge of nothing? It's nothing. So it's a bit of a problematic and tricky situation. It's not as simple as some might think it sounds. But at least the impersonalist, at least they accept, well, even they, of course, they're a problematic situation, but we're spirit souls, but when we become liberated, we merge with the greater spirituality, and we lose our personal existence. Although we don't exactly lose our existence, because we just merge with the greater existence, which is all one. So therefore Prabhupada makes the point in the purport that even though these people, the Buddhists and the impersonalists, they talk about and they try to achieve a state of nirvana, of like blissful nothingness. If it's blissful, it's not nothing. Anyways, if one thinks about it, it's really quite complicated and ends up being, and by definition, it must be intangible. But that's what they want. Become free from the material coverings, the gross body and the subtle body, become free, and then be in some sort of state, or whatever you'd say. Yes, that's nirvana. And the impersonalists say that we can merge Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, that Brahman, or the spiritual nature, is truth, and Jagan, this world, and these bodies which are part of this world, and the subtle body too, they are false. Yes, so therefore those people, the Buddhists or the impersonalists, they may, at least the impersonalist may attain a state of merging with the greater spiritual energy which is all-pervading. They may do that, but the nature of the soul is that the soul is individual, and the soul is pleasure-seeking. Yes, so the pleasure which is there in Brahman realization, merging in Brahman, is something, it's more than pleasure people get from sense gratification and doing all sorts of materialistic activities. It's a greater pleasure, but compared to what is the nature or the inclination of the soul and what the soul naturally feels attracted to, it's relatively small. The pleasure of merging. In Nectar of Devotion, it's described that compared to the pleasure of sense gratification, just ordinary materialistic pleasures, the pleasure of Brahman realization, merging, is much greater. Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, they say, it's like the pleasure of that Brahman realization is like an ocean, whereas the pleasure of material sense gratification is like a drop of water in the hoof print of a calf. So it's a lot more than what we're used to. But in terms of what is the actual nature of the soul, it's not that great. When we consider that the soul, just one soul, has much more power than many suns and can create a universe. So the power of the soul and the bliss of the soul is far greater than particularly, first of all, what we're used to in regular material life. But then, a little later, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, Nectar of Devotion, they say that the pleasure of Brahman realization, that merging, compared to the pleasure of pure devotional service, they use exactly the same example. That the pleasure of Brahman, in a relative sense, the pleasure of Brahman realization merging in the Brahmajyoti is like a drop, the amount of water you find, or you may find, in the hoof print of a calf, not even a cow, but just a little calf, compared to an ocean, which is the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. The ocean, Sindhu, the ocean of Amrita, of nectar, of Bhakti Rasa. Yes, the pleasure that's there in pure devotional service. So the thing is that those people who have actually merged, because it happens sometimes, it is not common, but it happens sometimes, they actually merge in the Brahmajyoti. They become successful, fully realized impersonalists. The problem is that the tendency of the soul is for much greater pleasure than what is there in that merged condition. So therefore, this hankering arises in the merged living being, hankering for more pleasure, more pleasure. And because they have no bhakti, so they have no access to devotional service, all they have access to is that pleasure of Brahman, or alternatively, go back to the material world and give it another try. Try to enjoy the material world again. What do you think? Back to Chatsworth. Back to Unit 5. I mean, Unit 5's pretty ordinary, but they might, someone might think, well, let me become royalty then. Back to Buckingham Palace or something like that, and then I'll enjoy. But no, it just cannot give you the pleasure which is inherently being hankered for by the soul within. Yes, so generally, they cannot really go up because they have no attachment to Krishna, they have no devotion at all. In so many cases, they have no even awareness that these things exist. So it's either stay there in the Brahmajyoti but be dissatisfied, or fall down to the material world to have another try and see how far you get, which is just sort of a doomed endeavor. So Prabhupada says that unless the living entity has information of the spiritual world, there is a 99.9% of, at some point, just falling back into material existence. Which means there is 0.1% that one might somehow or other go back to Godhead. How might that happen? Well, when the pure devotees and the avatars, but more the great pure devotees who are assisting the Lord in his pastimes, when they pass through the Brahmajyoti from the spiritual world down to the material world, or then from the material world back to the spiritual world. One of these living entities in the Brahmajyoti who's just coming back to sort of in an individual state as opposed to being simply merged and with no personal existence, but when they're sort of changing back like that, then Narada Muni may go flying by on his way back to Goloka Vrindavan. And the person just coming out of the impersonal state back to the personal state may see and think, wow, look at that. And in this way become attracted, maybe. It's possible. And in Brihad Bhagavatamrita particularly, well, Narada Muni is mentioned, of course, so many times, but in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the phenomenon of a devotee, because of the eternal service that devotee has, going up and down between the material world, spiritual world, then back down to the material world to help with the preaching and so on, and then back to the spiritual world, that's described in Brihad Bhagavatamrita. So other than getting some association like that momentarily, at that particular crucial point in time, and possibly becoming attracted, other than that, basically they're simply doomed sooner or later to fall back down into the material world and just get caught up again. And then it's just the same old story. Again, in this way and that way, 8,400,000 species of life. Yes. So therefore, well, Prabhupada mentions at the end of the purport, in the absence of varieties of enjoyment when you're merged, there's an absence of varieties of enjoyment. The spirit soul gradually feels an attraction to enjoy a life of bliss, but not having any information about the spiritual world naturally falls down to material activities in order to just try to enjoy some material varieties again. So the thing about Prithu Maharaj is that he is doing, you could say it's like a mechanical, a deliberate way. He's breaking down his physical system so that it's just gone due to being sort of handed over part by part to the material nature. But in our cases, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to do that, but without trying, because it takes some effort. Gradually, he merged his air of life with the totality of air, and gradually his body with the totality of earth, etc. But we don't need to worry. It will be done for us. Our bodies will just drop, and that will be that. And then in due course, the elements which make up our bodies at that time will just sort of merge into the, whatever it is, the air or the earth or the liquid, which is just around us. That's the material world. That's death. But then what will happen with us, the eternal spirit soul? That is the point. So for that we have to cultivate our Krishna consciousness. Really cultivate our Krishna consciousness and not be casual about it. Prabhupada would say casual, in this context, casual means casualty. In due course, you'll become a casualty in spiritual terms. And you'll just get deviated from proper Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comments, questions? Jai Satchidananda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj. Talking about Prabhupada's son, I saw a poster. I think he passed on just a few days ago. Earlier on, you mentioned about the life phase, how somebody. I was thinking of the word that's self-immolment.
What?
When they, like Sati performed that also, she sat and she body caught on fire and she.
Right.
And then Dhritarashtra also, similarly, after he was advised by Vidura to leave and go north. There's a word for self-immolment.
So self-immolate.
Yeah, something.
Self-immolate, yeah.
We see when the Chinese were persecuting the Buddhists, and the Buddhists, to get world attention, they would go in the public and they would pour kerosene and set fire to themselves as a sign of protest. And
right.
I've seen
and others too.
Pictures
yeah,
like that.
Not just Buddhists.
And then there's another group, the Nanda Margs, they were very strict. And when they broke the principles, they would go in public and do the same thing. And do that. Yeah.
Well, that's tamagun, you know.
Yeah.
To just deliberately damage the body or destroy it. That's heavy mode of ignorance. But Sati, similar to Prithu Maharaj, he just sort of now he's dealing, the fire, and now I'm going to do this with the fire, and the air, I'm going to do that with the air. So she worked on her fire. Yeah, somehow or other she had that capability. She just stimulated the fire which is within, until her body just burst into flame. And all that was left was dust. Yeah. There's a place, where is it? Haridwar, where they say it happened. I don't know if you've been there. It's an interesting place. Where it said that's where it's where Daksha's palace was. And at the entrance there's this quite big statue, 10 feet tall maybe, of Shiva carrying Sati. Yeah. Yes, anyway, they know how to adjust the elements to achieve different effects with the body.
In the case of Chota Haridas, after he was chastised by Lord Chaitanya,
does it describe what he did?
They didn't say, but there's talk that sannyasis will they go in Haridwar, somewhere
around, Varanasi.
And
maybe. Maybe he went there, and just because they're Brahmins who specialize in facilitating suicide. They take you, they have boats, take you out into the Ganges, tie, whatever, rocks or bricks or something, and away you go. Hare Krishna.
The story that you appeared like a Gandharva in Lord Chaitanya.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he would come and sing for Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, that's very special, sure. Amazing situation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Hare Krishna, Swami. So the Krishna consciousness tradition advocates that the soul is eternal.
The soul is what?
Eternal.
Eternal, yeah.
But is there possibility in the universe for non-existence where it's completely over?
The soul becomes non-existent.
Just like you have the Brahma Jyoti, you have Vrindavan, people talk about heaven, and all these possibilities. But is there non-existence where there's non-individuality?
No.
Okay.
Prabhupada made the point the void does not exist. I mean, and it's sort of by definition in one sense. But yeah, everywhere there is life, in everything there's life, and there's no void. The void does not exist. It's just sort of a type of imagination. So the only degree to which it exists is in someone's mind. But it's like a figment of the imagination.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for such a wonderful class. I find it difficult to reconcile the fact that Krishna says that intelligence is a separated energy of his, because I'm thinking that intelligence would be a function of the mind. So I'm kind of struggling to reconcile the two.
Okay, well, you know, the thing is, the mind has certain functions and the intelligence has different functions. They seem to mix, or not just mix, but be in a mixed state. But actually they're independent of each other, although they influence each other, but still, like two people can be two people, but they influence each other. So the mind is particularly connected with the senses. So the impulses that come from the senses, seeing, hearing, feeling, etc., the different sensory functions, the impulses come first to the mind. And then the mind makes decisions based on the idea, generally based on the idea, from which of these experiences will I get the greatest pleasure? And then focusing on that. And, so you may have had the experience of, for example, maybe you're studying and you're trying, to study, but some music is playing and your mind just keeps going there and you can't focus as you'd like on your studying because the mind feels that I will get more pleasure from listening to this music. Yes, like that. And the intelligence knows that, look, I've got to study here, but the mind is being pulled away. But if a person if their intelligence is not strong enough, which particularly means if they're not Krishna conscious enough, the intelligence will not have the strength to actually pull the mind back and get it to focus and stay focused, despite the attractiveness of the music. And therefore, some students, they go to university particularly, and, they're studying and they know they're meant to study, and because they want to get a particular degree, but the mind becomes attracted by the social environment and all the partying and etc., etc. And even though the mind is saying, hang on, look, you got to really study to make a success of this, but they fail because the intelligence was not strong enough to pull the mind back. But with devotees, particularly as devotees advance more, then the intelligence does become stronger. And, it may be a bit of a battle in the earlier stages, being attracted to this, attracted to that. Old habits die hard. But if we persevere, then gradually the mind will get the taste that the mind is looking for from Krishna consciousness. And that's why sometimes devotees, after they've been chanting for some time, but the mind just keeps on chanting, and they sort of can't stop the mind from chanting, because the mind has got a taste. This is the thing, the mind looks for taste. And now it's getting taste from Krishna consciousness. And it just keeps on chanting. And there's the story of Gopal Guru and Lord Caitanya. Lord Caitanya was going to the bathroom, he was holding his tongue. And the boy, 5-year-old child, asked, why are you holding your tongue? And Lord Caitanya said, because my tongue will just not stop chanting. And the Lord is present in his names, but I'm going to the bathroom, which is, a dirty and smelly place. So I don't want Krishna to be exposed to all that. But I can't stop chanting, so I'm stopping myself from chanting. And Gopal told Lord Caitanya, he said, no, you don't need to do that, because Shastra says that at the time of death you must chant, you have to chant, and the time of death is more contaminated than the bathroom. So